The first sign of trouble came not with a bang, but with an eerie silence. At 3:47 GMT, global communication networks experienced a simultaneous pulse, not a breakdown, but a momentary synchronization that sent chills through every monitoring station worldwide. Dr. Elena Rodriguez's Quantum Communication Lab at the United Nations Advanced Research Complex went silent for exactly 3.14 seconds. When the screens flickered back to life, a holographic projection materialized, not of data, but of an alien vessel so massive it seemed to consume the very fabric of sky above New York City. Commander Krell of the Zorn Collective was not interested in subtlety. His broadcast cut through every communication channel, translators struggling to capture the nuanced contempt in his alien language. Inhabitants of Earth, the translation scrolled across screens globally. Your civilization has been deemed insufficient. You will surrender all technological and biological resources. Resistance is mathematically improbable. The mothership's hull shifted, a living metallic surface that seemed to breathe with technological malevolence. Quantum sensors worldwide registered energy signatures completely unknown to human science. Massive gravitational engines warped the very atmosphere, creating localized weather anomalies that sparked electrical storms around the vessel. In the UN Emergency Command Center, Dr. Rodriguez stood perfectly still, her prosthetic arm, a marvel of quantum adaptive technology she personally developed after losing her original limb in a particle accelerator accident, hummed with a subtle energy. The arm was more than a replacement. It was a testament to human innovation, each microscopic component a product of collaborative research from scientists across 5 continents. Triangulate the communication source, she muttered to Amara Okafor, the young Kenyan communications specialist who was already 3 steps ahead. Amara's fingers danced across holographic interfaces, her Neuralink headset pulsing with streams of data that would overwhelm most human cognition. What the Zorn didn't understand was that this wasn't just a command center. It was a nexus of human potential. Dr. Yuki Tanaka, a biomechanical engineer from Tokyo, was already analyzing the gravitational signatures of the alien vessel. Beside her, Dr. Maria Alvarez from Buenos Aires was running quantum simulations that tracked every microvibration of the ship's hull. They weren't just observing, they were decoding their communication protocol. Amara said, her voice level but electric with excitement. It's a linear transmission. They're broadcasting on a single quantum frequency, believing it's unbreakable. A small smile crossed Dr. Rodriguez's face. The Zorn had no concept of the intricate communication networks humans had developed. Women, in particular, had mastered communication technologies that went far beyond simple audio or digital transmissions. They understood the power of context, of nuance, of multi-layered communication. Outside, panic was beginning to spread. Social media exploded with images of the massive ship. Military installations went on high alert. But in this room, there was only calculated preparation. Commander Krell's ultimatum continued to loop: surrender or destruction. But those in the room knew something the Zorn did not. Humanity's greatest strength was never in its ability to fight, but in its capacity to adapt, to understand, to transform. Dr. Rodriguez's prosthetic arm began to pulse, not with a mechanical rhythm, but with a quantum frequency that seemed almost alive. "Prepare the initial response protocol," she said quietly, but not the one they're expecting. The room fell into a synchronized silence. Screens flickered with complex algorithms, quantum encryption codes dancing like digital fireflies. Outside, the alien ship loomed, a testament to technological might. Inside this room, something far more powerful was taking shape. First contact was never going to be what the Zorn anticipated, and they were about to learn exactly why. The world looked broken, but humanity was anything but defeated. In a hidden bunker beneath the Andes Mountains, Sarah Chen connected the final quantum encrypted node to a network that defied every conventional understanding of communication. Around her, a team of specialists worked with surgical precision, each woman representing a different discipline, a different approach to the impending alien threat. Luz Ramirez, an indigenous biotechnology expert from Peru, carefully calibrated a series of nano-adaptive communication relays. Her design drew inspiration from the complex communication systems of leafcutter ant colonies, a biological network that had survived and thrived for millions of years. Each relay was more than a simple signal booster. It was a living, adaptive system that could reconfigure itself faster than any alien technology could track. Across the globe, similar cells activated. In Tokyo, Dr. Akiko Seto's team had been preparing for this moment for years. Their research into quantum entanglement had created a communication network that existed beyond traditional electromagnetic spectrum. Using principles derived from advanced particle physics and indigenous Japanese communication techniques, they developed a transmission method that was simultaneously everywhere and nowhere. A holographic display in the Andes bunker showed the global network coming to life. It wasn't a military grid, it was something far more sophisticated. Nodes of communication sparked to life in research centers, community centers, universities, and unexpected locations across every continent. In Cape Town, a collective of women engineers had been developing adaptive camouflage technology inspired by the color-changing abilities of cephalopods. Their system wasn't just about visual concealment. It was a comprehensive environmental adaptation protocol that could rewrite its own parameters in microseconds. Sarah Chen watched the network expand, her background as a special forces operator giving her a strategic perspective that went beyond traditional military thinking. This wasn't about creating a weapon. It was about building a living, breathing system of collective intelligence. Transmission Protocol Sigma-9 is online, Luz announced, her fingers dancing across a holographic interface that seemed to breathe with its own intelligence. The Zorn were monitoring global communication channels, believing they could predict and control human response. They were monumentally wrong. Each node in the network carried multiple layers of communication. On the surface, they appeared to be mundane data transmissions, weather reports, academic communications, social media chatter. Beneath that, a complex quantum-encrypted network was forming, sharing information at speeds and in methods the Zorn couldn't begin to comprehend. Dr. Aisha Okonkwo, joining from a research station in Lagos, had developed a communication algorithm based on the complex social structures of African elephant herds. Her system could transmit critical information through seemingly random data patterns that would appear as background noise to any external monitoring. "We're not just building a network," Sarah explained to the team. "We're creating a living organism of human potential." A notification pinged. One of their early warning systems had detected Zorn reconnaissance drones attempting to map global communication infrastructure. Instead of blocking the signals, the network did something unexpected. It fed the drones a carefully constructed maze of false information, each piece of data the beautiful, intricate lie that would take months to fully unravel. Luz looked up from her station, a rare smile crossing her face. "They're collecting exactly the information we want them to collect." The bunker hummed with a sense of controlled excitement. This wasn't panic. This was preparation. Each woman knew her role. Each contribution was a critical piece of a complex, adaptive strategy. Outside, the world seemed to be holding its breath. News channels showed scenes of apparent chaos, military mobilizations, public panic, governmental emergency sessions. But beneath that surface, a far more sophisticated response was taking shape. Sarah Chen touched a holographic interface, bringing up a global map. Each node in their network pulsed with a subtle, almost organic light. To an outside observer, it might look like nothing more than a complex data visualization. To those who understood, it was the first line of humanity's defense. Full network synchronization in 3, Luz announced. 2, 1. The quantum network came fully online, a living, breathing system of human potential that the Zorn Collective was about to discover was nothing like they had ever encountered before. The first shot in the war was never fired. It was whispered. In the Zorn Collective's central command vessel, senior communication analyst Sark realized something was fundamentally wrong. The human communication patterns defied every known xenolinguistic algorithm in their vast database. What appeared to be random noise was actually a symphony of misinformation so complex it bordered on art. Dr. Elena Rodriguez sat in a specially designed quantum communication hub beneath the United Nations complex. Around her, a team of experts from disciplines that had never before collaborated worked with an almost musical synchronicity. Linguists sat beside quantum physicists. Anthropologists worked with data engineers. Psychologists collaborated with communication specialists. Target acquisition complete. Amara Okafor announced, her fingers dancing across a holographic interface that seemed to breathe with its own intelligence. The interface wasn't just displaying data, it was actively interpreting, predicting, manipulating. Their strategy was brutally elegant. The Zorn believed they were gathering intelligence. In reality, they were being fed an intricate narrative carefully constructed to exploit every psychological weakness in their hierarchical, patriarchal social structure. Each communication stream was a carefully crafted piece of psychological warfare. Academic papers appeared in obscure journals, containing kernels of seemingly innocuous information that, when cross-referenced, would create impossible logical paradoxes in Zorn intelligence systems. Social media posts from carefully constructed personas told stories that subtly undermined the aliens' understanding of human motivation. In Beijing, Dr. Lai Wei had developed a communication algorithm based on the complex social dynamics of ant colonies, a system of communication so layered that individual messages became almost impossible to isolate or understand without complete context. Her team created digital personas that existed in multiple communication spaces simultaneously, leaving traces of information that would drive the Zorn's analytical systems to complete confusion. On the Zorn mothership, Commander Krell watched in mounting frustration as their intelligence gathering became increasingly nonsensical. Reports from their most advanced analysis teams described human communication as a quantum-level psychological labyrinth. The truly brilliant aspect of the human strategy was its multi-layered nature. What appeared to be a weakness was actually a strength. The Zorn's rigid hierarchical thinking couldn't comprehend the fluid, adaptive nature of human communication. We're not just blocking their intelligence, Dr. Rodriguez explained to her team. We're actively reshaping their perception of reality. A breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Dr. Aisha Okonkwo, drawing from her research on complex communication systems in African tribal networks, developed a method of information transmission that used cultural context as its primary encryption. To the Zorn, it would appear as nothing more than meaningless cultural noise. To humans, it was a precise communication network. Sarah Chen monitored the global response. Military installations appeared to be in chaos, but it was a carefully choreographed dance. Each seemingly random movement was part of a larger strategy designed to create maximum confusion for the alien observers. The psychological warfare went deeper than simple misinformation. It was a systematic deconstruction of the Zorn's understanding of human motivation, capability, and social structure. Quantum entanglement protocol is at 87% synchronization. Luz Ramirez called out, her voice calm despite the unprecedented nature of what they were achieving. On the Zorn mothership, senior analyst Sark began to experience what humans might call a nervous breakdown. The information streams made no logical sense. Patterns emerged and dissolved. Contradictions became the norm. Their most advanced artificial intelligence systems were beginning to show signs of what could only be described as cognitive dissonance. Commander Krell's frustration boiled over. "Explain," he demanded of his intelligence team. "How can a species be simultaneously this chaotic and this precise?" The answer, of course, was something the Zorn could not yet understand. Humanity's strength was not in uniformity, but in its ability to be multiple things at once. A communication network that was simultaneously a weapon, a defensive system, and a work of collaborative art. As the first phase of psychological warfare reached its peak, The human team allowed themselves a moment of collective satisfaction. They hadn't fired a single weapon. They had dismantled the Zorn's perception of reality using nothing more than information, creativity, and an understanding of communication that went far beyond simple data transmission. The war had begun, and the Zorn had no idea what was happening. The first Zorn attack wave arrived with mathematical precision, a constellation of weaponized drones that should have obliterated any planetary defense system. Instead, they found something entirely unexpected. Major Sarah Chen stood in a mobile command center carved into the Atacama Desert, her neural link interface dancing with holographic projections that looked more like abstract art than military strategy. "Initiate Chimera Protocol," she whispered, her voice calm despite the global stakes. Thousands of kilometers away, in a converted research facility beneath the Canadian Shield, Dr. Elena Rodriguez watched quantum adaptive defense systems come to life. What the Zorn saw as targets were actually intricate technological ecosystems, living networks that could think, adapt, and counterattack faster than any traditional military system. The Zorn's initial assault targeted what their intelligence suggested were critical infrastructure points. A massive electromagnetic pulse swept across major cities, designed to disable communication and defense systems. But instead of destruction, the pulse met something entirely unexpected. Dr. Yuki Tanaka's adaptive metamaterial networks absorbed the electromagnetic energy, transforming it into a communication vector that immediately began mapping the Zorn drone swarm's communication frequencies. Each absorption point was a node in a massive, distributed intelligence network that was simultaneously defensive and offensive. In New Delhi, a team led by Dr. Priya Sharma had developed drone technology inspired by the murmuration patterns of starlings, individual units that could act both independently and as a collective intelligence. As the Zorn drones approached, these human-designed systems began to move in patterns that defied traditional military logic. One Zorn tactical commander watching the initial assault would later describe it as witnessing a living organism respond to a threat. The drones didn't just evade. They actively manipulated the Zorn's targeting systems. Each movement was a quantum-encrypted message, a piece of a larger strategic puzzle that the aliens couldn't comprehend. Where a traditional military might have responded with direct force, these systems responded with adaptive misdirection. A Zorn battlecruiser tracking a group of adaptive drones suddenly found its own targeting systems compromised. The drones weren't just avoiding detection, they were actively rewriting the ship's operational parameters. Navigation systems began to report impossible data. Communication channels filled with cascading error messages. Energy redirection at 92% efficiency, Dr. Rodriguez called out, watching as the electromagnetic assault was not just neutralized, but actively turned against the Zorn systems. Sarah Chen's tactical overlay showed something remarkable. The adaptive defense systems weren't just protecting, they were learning. Each interaction with the Zorn technology became a data point, a new strategy, a potential countermove. The human technological ecosystem was evolving in real time. In the Pacific, a series of underwater communication nodes developed by a consortium of marine biologists and quantum physicists began to interfere with the Zorn's orbital communication networks. Drawing inspiration from the complex communication methods of whale pods, these systems created interference patterns that made precise targeting impossible. "They're treating this like a mathematical problem," Dr. Luz Ramirez observed, watching the tactical displays. "But we're writing a different kind of equation." The Zorn had prepared for a traditional military engagement. They had calculated potential resistance scenarios based on historical human conflicts. They had not prepared for a defense system that was more of a living organism than a traditional military network. Individual drone units began to work together in ways that defied their original programming. A drone damaged in one sector would transmit its sensory data to nearby units, which would immediately adapt their approach. The entire system moved like a complex, intelligent fluid, absorbing damage, redistributing resources, creating new strategies in microseconds. Commander Krell watched in mounting horror as his perfectly planned assault dissolved into chaos. Their most advanced tracking systems showed nothing but impossible data. Targets appeared and disappeared. Communication channels filled with noise that seemed to have its own intelligence. "This is impossible," a Zorn tactical analyst muttered, watching systems that seemed to defy the fundamental laws of technological engagement. As the first wave of the attack concluded, the human defense systems had not just survived. They had transformed the entire nature of the conflict. The war was no longer about territory or traditional military objectives. It had become something entirely different, a conflict of adaptive intelligence, of technological ecosystems that could think, learn, and respond faster than any traditional military strategy could anticipate. And the Zorn were just beginning to understand they were facing something entirely unprecedented. The research facility was nothing like the sterile laboratories the Zorn would have expected. Nestled in the heart of the Andes, it resembled an organic ecosystem more than a traditional scientific installation. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood at its center, surrounded by a holographic constellation of data that seemed to breathe with its own intelligence. "Final calibration sequence initiating," Dr. Aisha Okonkwo announced, her voice cutting through the electric anticipation that filled the room. The quantum communication system they had been developing was about to become something far more than a mere technological tool. What the Zorn didn't understand was that this wasn't just a weapon or a communication system. It was a living network of human potential. Dr. Yuki Tanaka had spent years developing neural adaptive interfaces that drew inspiration from the most complex biological systems on Earth. Her breakthrough came from an unexpected source, studying the intricate communication networks of mycelial fungi, which could transmit information across vast underground networks faster than any digital system. The quantum system began to take shape. It wasn't a singular device, but a distributed network of consciousness, drawing from the collective intelligence of researchers, scientists, and thinkers from every corner of the globe. Each node was a person, each connection a potential for innovation that the Zorn could never comprehend. Quantum entanglement protocol reaching critical synchronization. Luz Ramirez called out, her fingers dancing across interfaces that seemed to respond to her touch like living organisms. Sarah Chen watched the tactical overlay, understanding something profound was happening. This wasn't just about defending against an alien invasion. It was about redefining the very concept of intelligence, of communication, of potential. The system drew power from an unprecedented source. Quantum processors developed using principles inspired by indigenous knowledge systems from around the world. A communication network that understood context, emotion, and collective experience in ways no traditional artificial intelligence could comprehend. A warning flashed across the global network. The Zorn were preparing to deploy a planet-killing weapon, a massive gravitational disruptor designed to tear apart Earth's molecular structure. Traditional defenses would be useless. But this was not a traditional defense. The quantum system began to do something impossible. It didn't just calculate potential countermeasures. It began to understand the weapon at a fundamental level, not just its technological components, but the philosophical and strategic thinking behind its design. Dr. Rodriguez watched in awe as the system began to generate potential responses. Each possibility was a complex web of potential outcomes, drawing from disciplines that the Zorn would never consider relevant to warfare. Sociology intersected with quantum physics. Ecological systems merged with communication theory. "We're not just blocking the weapon," Dr. Rodriguez explained to her team. "We're fundamentally rewriting the context of its existence." The Zorn weapon was a marvel of destructive engineering, a gravitational manipulation device that could theoretically tear apart planetary structures at the molecular level. It represented the pinnacle of their technological understanding, a pure expression of force, of dominance. The human response was something entirely different. As the weapon powered up, the quantum system did something unexpected. It didn't just generate a counter-frequency or create a defensive barrier. It began to communicate with the weapon itself, not in any language the Zorn would understand, but in a complex series of quantum interactions that rewrote the fundamental parameters of the device's existence. Amara Okafor watched the tactical display, her breath catching. "It's not just stopping the weapon," she whispered. "It's teaching it." The gravitational disruptor began to change. Its destructive potential didn't disappear, it transformed. The weapon's underlying quantum structure began to realign. Its pure destructive potential redirected into something closer to a communication device. Commander Krell watched in horror as his ultimate weapon of destruction became something he could not comprehend. It was no longer a tool of annihilation, but a complex network of potential, of understanding. "This is impossible," a Zorn tactical analyst muttered, watching systems that seemed to defy every fundamental law of technological engagement. The quantum breakthrough was more than a defensive mechanism. It was a statement, a fundamental reimagining of what technology could be. Not a tool of destruction, but a method of understanding. Not a weapon of war, but a bridge of communication. The Zorn had come expecting to find a primitive species ready for conquest. Instead, they found something far more dangerous. A civilization that could transform their most devastating weapon into a potential point of understanding. The battle moved beyond technology and into the realm of collective consciousness. In the UN Emergency Communication Hub, Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood before a holographic display that was part strategic map, part living artwork. The walls seemed to breathe with information, cultural data streams, sociological patterns, and communication networks that defied traditional understanding of conflict. "We're not just fighting," she explained to the team. "We're communicating on a level the Zorn cannot comprehend." Dr. Aisha Okonkwo had developed a breakthrough communication protocol based on the complex social structures of African communities. Drawing from generations of adaptive survival strategies, her system was a living network of cultural intelligence that could transmit information through layers of context, emotion, and collective experience. On the Zorn mothership, senior analyst Tark struggled to process the incoming data streams. What appeared to be random communication patterns were actually intricate messages that carried multiple layers of meaning. Academic papers contained hidden diplomatic communications. Social media posts were sophisticated encryption vectors. Children's stories became complex strategic transmissions. A team of anthropologists, linguists, and communication specialists had created something unprecedented. It wasn't just a method of communication. It was a way of understanding that the hierarchical, rigid Zorn society could not process. In Tokyo, Dr. Yuki Tanaka's team had developed a communication system inspired by the concept of Ma, the Japanese understanding of negative space, of meaning that exists in the spaces between things. Their transmission protocols carried information in the pauses, in the undefined moments between clear communication. Sarah Chen monitored a global network that was simultaneously a defensive system, a communication platform, and a cultural exchange. Each transmission was a complex dance of information, context, and potential. The Zorn had approached Earth expecting a straightforward conquest. Instead, they found themselves navigating a communication ecosystem that was alive, adaptive, and fundamentally unpredictable. Commander Krell received reports that made no logical sense. Military installations appeared and disappeared. Communication channels shifted in ways that defied their understanding of information transfer. What seemed like chaos was actually a sophisticated form of cultural warfare. "We're dismantling their entire conceptual framework," Dr. Rodriguez explained, watching the global network pulse with living information, not through destruction, but through understanding. Luz Ramirez had developed a transmission protocol that drew from indigenous communication methods from South America. It wasn't just about sending information. It was about creating a shared context of experience. Each transmission carried layers of meaning that went beyond simple data transfer. The Zorn began to experience something they had never encountered before. Their rigid hierarchical society, built on clear chains of command and linear thinking, was being systematically deconstructed by a communication network that operated more like a living organism. Diplomatic channels became complex performance art. What appeared to be simple negotiations were actually sophisticated psychological operations that rewrote the fundamental understanding of interaction. A breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A group of educators and child psychologists developed a communication protocol based on how children learn and adapt. It was a system of communication that was inherently creative, nonlinear, and capable of radical reimagining. On the Zorn mothership, the most advanced analysis systems began to show signs of what could only be described as cognitive breakdown. Their understanding of communication, of conflict, of interaction was being fundamentally challenged. "They're not just resisting," a Zorn tactical analyst muttered in growing confusion. "They're redefining the entire concept of engagement." The cultural warfare went deep. It wasn't about defeating the Zorn. It was about showing them a fundamentally different way of existing, a way of understanding that valued complexity, adaptability, and collective intelligence over rigid hierarchical structures. Sarah Chen watched the global network, understanding that they were doing something unprecedented. This was more than a defense. It was a comprehensive reimagining of what conflict could be. Commander Krell stared at the communication displays, experiencing something close to existential terror. The humans were not just fighting. They were transforming the very nature of interaction, of understanding, of potential. As the cultural warfare reached its peak, the Zorn found themselves facing something they could never have anticipated. Not an enemy to be conquered, but a living, breathing ecosystem of intelligence that defied every fundamental assumption of their civilization. The true weapon was not technology. It was understanding. The final battle was nothing like any conflict in galactic history. The Zorn mothership hung in Earth's orbit like a massive wound in the fabric of space, its technological majesty now seeming fragile and uncertain. Inside, Commander Krell realized they were no longer conducting an invasion. They were trapped in a scenario beyond their comprehension. Sarah Chen stood in the central command hub, her neural interface pulsing with a network of information that was part tactical system, part living intelligence. "Initiate Prometheus Protocol," she whispered, her voice calm despite the global stakes. Across the planet, seemingly unconnected systems began to synchronize. A weather monitoring station in Antarctica, a quantum research facility in Switzerland, a community center in Brazil, a marine research vessel in the Pacific. Each became a node in a global response that defied traditional military strategy. Dr. Elena Rodriguez watched as the quantum communication network they had developed transformed. It was no longer just a defensive system or a communication platform. It had become something alive, a collective intelligence that understood conflict in ways the Zorn could never comprehend. The attack, when it came, was beautifully subtle. Instead of massive energy weapons or destructive force, the human response was a comprehensive deconstruction of the Zorn's entire technological and social infrastructure. Communication channels began to shift. The Zorn's most secure systems found themselves compromised not through brute force hacking, but through a complex infiltration that rewrote their fundamental operational parameters. Dr. Yuki Tanaka's adaptive systems began to work their magic. Where the Zorn expected resistance, they found something far more dangerous, a complete reimagining of their technological assumptions. Quantum processors developed using principles inspired by indigenous knowledge systems began to interact with the Zorn's most advanced technologies. It wasn't an attack. It was a conversation, a complex dialogue that existed beyond traditional understanding of conflict. "We're not destroying their systems," Dr. Rodriguez explained to her team. "We're teaching them." Aboard the mothership, Zorn technicians watched in horror as their most advanced systems began to change. Weapon platforms transformed into communication arrays. Defensive networks became channels of cultural exchange. The very fabric of their technological understanding began to unravel and remake itself. Luz Ramirez monitored the global network, her interface showing a complex web of interactions that looked more like a living ecosystem than a military operation. "Quantum entanglement at 98% synchronization," she called out, her voice a mixture of scientific precision and something closer to wonder. The Zorn had come expecting a conventional conflict. They found themselves facing a comprehensive reimagining of what conflict could be. Sarah Chen's tactical overlay showed something unprecedented. The human response wasn't about defeating the Zorn, it was about transforming them. Each interaction was a potential point of understanding, each communication a bridge between fundamentally different ways of existing. Commander Krell experienced something close to a spiritual breakdown. Their invasion, a carefully calculated military operation, was being dismantled not through force, but through a comprehensive demonstration of adaptive intelligence. The quantum communication network did something impossible. It began to communicate with the Zorn's core systems, not as an enemy, but as a potential partner in understanding. Complex mathematical models merged with cultural context. Technological systems became channels of potential communication. "They're not fighting," a bewildered Zorn analyst muttered. "They're evolving us." Amara Okafor watched the global tactical display, understanding they were doing something unprecedented. This wasn't just a defense of Earth. It was a comprehensive demonstration of human potential, a way of engaging with conflict that transcended traditional military thinking. The mothership's systems began to change. Weapon platforms transformed. Communication channels opened. The rigid hierarchical structure of Zorn society found itself confronted with a fundamentally different way of understanding existence. As the decisive confrontation reached its peak, the Zorn discovered something terrifying and beautiful. Humanity's true strength was not in its ability to destroy, but in its capacity to understand, to adapt, to transform. The final moment of the conflict was not a battle. It was a conversation. And the Zorn were about to learn that conversation could be the most powerful weapon of all. The silence was more profound than any victory celebration. In the weeks following the confrontation, Earth found itself transformed in ways no one could have anticipated. The global communication network that had been humanity's primary defense now became something entirely different, a living bridge between civilizations. Dr. Elena Rodriguez sat in a specially designed diplomatic chamber at the United Nations, surrounded by holographic displays that seemed to breathe with their own intelligence. Beside her, representatives from the slowly transforming Zorn collective struggled to understand the magnitude of what had occurred. "We didn't defeat you," she explained, her voice calm and precise. "We invited you to understand." The Zorn diplomatic delegation, a group that would have been unimaginable mere months ago, listened with a mixture of confusion and emerging comprehension. Their rigid hierarchical structure was being systematically dismantled, not through force, but through a comprehensive demonstration of collaborative intelligence. Sarah Chen monitored the global networks, watching as the technologies developed during the conflict began to find peaceful applications. Quantum communication systems originally designed for defense were now being used to address global challenges: climate change, medical research, educational access. Dr. Yuki Tanaka's adaptive technologies found themselves repurposed in ways that defied their original conception. A communication system developed to outmaneuver alien intelligence was now helping to bridge communication gaps between remote communities on Earth. Quantum processors originally designed for strategic defense were now solving complex medical research challenges. The Zorn were experiencing something unprecedented. Their entire societal structure was being reimagined, not through conquest, but through exposure to a fundamentally different way of understanding potential. "Your civilization's greatest strength," a Zorn senior analyst observed during one of the early diplomatic sessions, "is your ability to transform threat into opportunity." Luz Ramirez led a team developing new educational programs that merged human and Zorn technological understanding. What had begun as a defensive strategy was becoming a comprehensive cultural exchange. Schools around the world began developing curriculum that incorporated the lessons learned from the conflict, emphasizing adaptability, collaborative intelligence, and the power of diverse perspectives. Amara Okafor discovered that the communication protocols developed during the conflict had unexpected applications in medical research. The complex quantum communication systems could now help diagnose diseases by understanding the nuanced communication between cellular systems in ways previous medical technologies could not. The global network that had been humanity's primary defense was now a living testament to human potential. It wasn't just a technological system. It was a platform for understanding, for growth, for potential. Commander Krell, who had once led the Zorn invasion, now found himself part of a diplomatic team working to understand human potential. The rigid military structure that had defined Zorn society was being systematically dismantled, replaced by a more adaptive, collaborative approach. "We believe power was about control," Krell admitted during one diplomatic session. "We now understand it's about potential." The technologies developed during the conflict found themselves repurposed in ways that addressed global challenges. Adaptive communication systems helped coordinate global climate response efforts. Quantum processing technologies accelerated medical research. The defensive networks became platforms for global collaboration. Dr. Rodriguez understood they had done something unprecedented. This wasn't just a defense of Earth. It was a comprehensive demonstration of human potential, a way of engaging with difference that transcended traditional conflict. The Zorn were learning that their previous understanding of intelligence, of potential, of existence, had been fundamentally limited. Humanity offered something far more complex, a way of understanding that valued adaptability, diversity, and collective potential. Global institutions began to transform. The United Nations became something more than a diplomatic platform. It became a living network of potential, drawing from the lessons learned during the conflict. Collaborative intelligence became the primary model of global interaction. As the first year after the conflict concluded, humanity looked different. The global communication network that had been their primary defense was now their primary platform for understanding. Technologies developed in the crucible of potential destruction were now tools of unprecedented collaboration. Sarah Chen watched the global networks, understanding they had done something more than defend against an invasion. They had demonstrated a fundamentally different way of existing. The legacy of the conflict was not victory, it was understanding. And that, humanity had discovered, was the most powerful weapon of all.